Hello, everyone. Thanks for taking the time today to join us. My name is Vivek, and I'm one of the founders here at Survey Analytics. And I did not think I would say this, but I'm very excited to talk about discrimination today. No, I'm not talking about social discrimination. I'm talking about MaxDiff scaling or maximum difference scaling, as the market research stalwarts call it, really. I'm very, very honored that we are joined by two luminaries in the research world today. I'm pleased to welcome Richard McCullough. Richard is the founder of an advisory services firm out of Santa Cruz called Macro Consulting. He has been helping Fortune 500 clients throughout their research needs for over 30 years, and he has spoken before the American Marketing Association, the Market Research Association, and various universities on a wide variety of marketing topics. He's a past board member of the AMA from right here in the San Francisco Bay Area, and he has been quoted in the Canadian Packaging magazine quite a few times. And he's also chaired and applied multivariate statistics seminars many times, and super excited that he's agreed to join us for our conversation today. I also have Bert Willard. Bert is a data scientist at Ferguson. Ferguson is a wholesale distributor of plumbing, HVAC, and generally all home improvement categories. They're pretty big. They're about $10 billion in revenue and about 19,000 associates, I think, and about 1,500 locations. Bert runs research for Ferguson, and here's a little known fact about Bert. Bert's also a client of ours. He's a client of Survey Analytics, and internally he's been labeled as the Miley Cyrus of research, really. Finally, I have Esther Lavielle. She's part of Survey Analytics and is in charge of client services here. And she's been with us for quite a while now, and for I think about 4 years. And she's been absolutely instrumental in our growth and she takes care of all things conjoint pricing related, as well as MaxDiff and pricing analytics, really. So the agenda today is really to talk about MaxDiff, really, and why it's important, its history, and its trends, really. So I really think we need to showcase some of the practical examples and we want to kind of show you how to set up MaxDiff within Survey Analytics. And then also I want to bring in Bert in. He's a client of ours, and obviously he uses MaxDiff quite a bit in his day-to-day job. And he's used it very creatively. I was talking to Bert yesterday, and he's used it very creatively in terms of how he's used it. So we want to kind of set the stage up front with Richard talking to us about MaxDiff scaling, the history, and the context behind it. So that's it. That's all I have. So let's the party begin. Richard, I'm gonna pass on the controls to you right now, and then you can take it away. Give me a second. Let me find you. There we go. Make presenter. Oops.
The question is, why MaxDiff? And the reason that MaxDiff is so popular now is because of rating scales batteries. And I think you're probably all familiar with rating scales batteries. They're some sort of fixed number of points. In this example, it's a 5-point scale, and we're rating brand imagery statements. But there's a variety of you might use brand rating scales, but I think we're all familiar with them. We can go to slide 3. On slide 3, I just listed top of mind areas where I could think of that we used rating scales batteries in the past. And I listed some out there. I bet if you look at that list, I've got attitudes and lifestyles and psychographics, satisfaction, importance, brand imagery, brand preference. You could probably add to it. I think Bert will probably be adding to it when he talks about a real-world example or application of MaxDiff. But you can see under the uses that you can use rating scales, and people do use rating scales on all the really big sort of important aspects of strategic marketing, segmentation and brand positioning, for example, real important stuff. Click one more time. There's a text box that'll arrive on slide 3, and that will be, I think, a very good rule of thumb on when you can apply MaxDiff in a real survey. And you can use MaxDiff scalings in general anywhere you can use rating scale batteries. So all the places on slide 3 where I've listed different places you can use rating scales, you can use MaxDiff instead. And then the question becomes, why would you want to? And that is on slide 4. And the reason you would want to is because rating scales really do a lousy job of collecting information. And they are ubiquitous, but that doesn't make them good. Rating scales, I'm still waiting for my slide 4 to show up. Here we go. Rating scales typically give you flat responses across statements, which is exactly the opposite of what we want. We want to be able to discriminate across statements. We want to be able to find differences. They're flat across brands often. And very, very importantly to segmentation, rating scales have something called scale use bias. Different people use different parts of a scale. If you're using a 10-point scale, for example, where 10 is the best and 1 is the worst, Northern European cultures tend to use the lower ends of the scale, where a lot of Asian cultures will use the higher end of the scale. So there's a cultural bias that's in effect anytime you use rating scales. So if you're doing a multinational segmentation study, rating scales are absolutely horrible to use. But even if you're doing a segmentation study inside the US, we are a very diverse culture here. And there are going to be people using the scales differently, and you will be segmenting based on how they use scales rather than on the basis that you want to segment on. And it can be really misleading. Now, doing brand imagery work, there's something called brand halo, and rating scales keep brand halo in, and that causes lots of problems in terms of understanding what people really feel about a brand, and also doing any modeling of that data later for, say, driver analysis, for example. So rating scales are not very discriminating. They're highly correlated with one another, and so they have very little information content. It's almost like asking one question, even when you have a battery of 30 or 40 items. So obviously, we would like to make an improvement on that, and MaxDiff does. Slide 5, please. So what is MaxDiff? Here's an example that's showing up on my screen slowly of a MaxDiff task. Slide 5 will show a MaxDiff task. I don't know if it's on your screen. Oh, here it is on mine. And they're very simple to do, and that's a good thing. You show let's say you have a ratings battery of 30 items. You show someone 5 of those items at a time, and you ask them which one is most strongly associated with or best describes the brand Sony, and which one least does. Now, you can ask questions like, which is the most important to you, and least important, which is the most desirable, least desirable, depending on what kind of issue you're trying to address. But that's why it's called MaxDiff. It's a maximum difference scaling method. And in this method, people are choosing one or none. So there's no scale at all. So there's no scale usage bias. So it removes a scale usage bias. Potentially, it can remove band halo if you do something a little bit tricky. And in all cases, it is more discriminating than rating scales. If you click, there'll be a box show up and then some text. So click twice, if you would, please, Vivek.
Yep.
And so the first item in the box will show up. When you have, say, 30 items, you take groups of 5, and you would do multiple numbers of these choice tasks, MaxDiff choice tasks, where they'll give you most and they'll give you least. And then you do that over and over again with different sets of items. Typically, you would put between 3 and 5 items in a task, although you're not constrained by that. But most humans have holding more than 5 things in their mind at a time, so try to limit it to 5 typically. Once you've collected all this choice data, using some advanced forms of regression that actually came out in the late 90s, called hierarchical Bayesian estimation, we can generate scores for each item for each person. So you get respondent level data that is not highly collinear with one another. It's more discriminating and it's more predictive. And if you click finally, I think there will be one more. It's showing up slowly on my machine. But just as an example, if you had those 30 items, you might do as many as 18 tasks of 5 items each in the experimental design in order to collect the data that you want to collect. On slide 6, I'm just giving you a little taste of some of the variations you can do with MaxDiff. You can extend it and be a little creative with it in a methodological sense. Slide 6 should be a video clip showing how we have adapted MaxDiff to do brand imagery analysis. One of the problems using MaxDiff for brand imagery analysis is you have to collect data on multiple brands, so the data collection phase can get a little bit long and a little tedious. So with this technique here, we throw the brands in one at a time on a single task and then slide them over once you've answered them. And it tends to engage the respondent a little bit better, and it seems to be a little more efficient data collection method.
Richard, I have a quick question here. So, a quick question over here. Pretty smart way. So, is the argument here that because you're doing brand imagery testing, users want to see the brands juxtaposed to each other? Is that the kind of, or is it just kind of pure ease of cognitive stress? I guess is that the reasoning behind this kind of cute way of doing this?
The primary reasoning was to try to collect this data as time efficiently as possible, as well as cognitively efficiently. It wasn't really for the sort of implicit scaling that you get when you show the brand simultaneously, although I do think that that's a benefit. But the main reason that we were motivated to try to develop this was to collect the data quicker. Because if you take 5 brands, and if you have to do 18 choice tasks, that's 5 times 18 choice tasks,
right,
or 90. And that's too many. But doing it this way, you can actually get those 90 choice tasks done.
Right, right, and it feels as if you're not going from one page to the other. You're just kind of extending and expanding upon what you're just answering, really, at least from a user interface perspective.
You have the same 5 items shown, so you don't have to sort of reorient yourself to the 5 items as you do each of the subsequent brands, and so there's efficiencies in that.
Yeah, that's great. That's a pretty smart idea, actually.
Thank you. And we also hope that, and we haven't done a lot of research on this, but we hope that there's some level of additional engagement just because of the animation involved. It's kind of cute. People seem to like to do it. So slide 7 will show you some data results from this particular technique, but there's many papers written that demonstrate the superiority of MaxDiff to rating scales data. I'm just showing a couple of pictures here to illustrate the fact that you get better data from MaxDiff than you do rating scales. The chart on the left is rating scales brand imagery data, and the right is MaxDiff imagery data. And you can see that there's more variation. There's more peaks and valleys for any individual brand. But what's particularly interesting to us is that the bottom line, the blue line there, is a new brand that's relatively new to the marketplace. And it's essentially flat line. There's no statistical difference between any of the items in that list. But in the MaxDiff version, there is quite a bit of variation in the perceptions of that brand. So it's a more sensitive brand image measure. And also the gap between the new brand and the 2 established brands is much diminished in the MaxDiff. There's actually a spot where the new brand exceeds the old brands on one item, and it's an item that you would expect the new brand to exceed the old on. The new brand is a high-tech brand in a fairly traditional category, light bulbs. And so even though it's new, it should score higher on high-tech dimensions than the old traditional brands do. And it does in the MaxDiff version. So the client has found this data to be much more holistic and useful in the real world than the ratings data. So let me go to the last slide just to summarize MaxDiff, and that is that it's superior to rating scales in almost every way. Better inter-item discrimination, better predictability. It eliminates brand halo if you do a few tricky things. We learned something interesting in that particular area as we're doing some research on this. But it eliminates scale usage bias always. And you also have fewer invalid completes. With ratings data, you get so many flatliners that you have to toss, because flatline data is useless, and we know that they're lying. So you have to eliminate them from your data set and reduce the sample size. But you get a whole lot fewer bad respondents with MaxDiff data. It's harder to fool the system in MaxDiff data. The one negative I would say is that MaxDiff does take a little bit longer than rating scales.
All right. All right.
And that's it for the.
All right. All right. Thanks, Richard. That was in spite of the technical issues, we kind of powered through it. I think that was good. In terms of, can you talk a little bit in terms of, obviously ratings versus MaxDiff scaling? Can you talk a little bit about, what is your response when people talk about sampling and sample sizes, right? Do sample sizes have to be adjusted if you are using a MaxDiff scaling model versus a ratings model, because it's, or is it the same sample size that you go with?
It's a really good question. And the short answer is it's roughly the same sample size. You don't really want to look at ratings data with samples of smaller than 100 because your mean estimates are not stable.
Mm-hmm.
And if you have 100 people, you will get good MaxDiff estimates. So you'll have stable answers there. You can also adjust the sample size issue by playing with the number of items per task and the number of tasks per respondent.
Mm-hmm.
So if you have say you had 60 people, you could increase the number of tasks you show each of the 60 people and get your precision up to the level that you'd like it to be too. And in a case like that, you'd actually have better stability than you would with ratings data because 60 is a pretty small number.
Right. Got it. Good. Thank you. We'll come back to some questions. I mean, if you have questions, just keep asking the questions. I'll try to get to the questions and kind of pose it to the panel. We'll now switch to Esther, who's going to go over the survey analytics implementation of MaxDiff for about 10 minutes, and then about 5 to 10 minutes, and then we'll switch back to Bert. And I really want you guys to listen into Bert about how he's used MaxDiff in HR, really, of all places. So that's going to be an interesting conversation. So Esther, you should be able to go, and we can see your screen. Go for it.
Thanks, Vivek, and thank you, Richard, for an excellent overview on the theories of MaxDiff. So hopefully everyone can see my screen. And in this section, I'm going to focus in on how to use MaxDiff scaling on survey analytics. And one of the great things about MaxDiff scaling is that, the attributes don't have to be 100% homogeneous in nature, and that gives companies a great opportunity to test a variety of items at once. So let's go ahead and look at a fun example that I put together for this presentation today, and I'm going to be using Rover. And Rover is a home boarding and pet sitting tech site that straddles both the pet care and the sharing industry. It's one of my favorite sites that I use to board my fur baby, and I would like to think of it as Airbnb for dogs. So it kind of has that same look. And so if Rover came to me at Survey Analytics and said, hey, we're running a doggy costume contest, and all these pictures we're getting from all of our users are super cute, and we just can't decide which one is the winner, then I would tell them that using a MaxDiff question type will be perfect to help them find who are their winners and who are their losers. So let's go ahead and get started with an example that I built. First thing you want to do is log into Survey Analytics and click on the Add Question button. Select Advanced Question Types and open up the MaxDiff template. The next thing you want to do is go ahead and write a description in the question text. Set up your most and least parameters, and then add in your attributes below. You'll also be able to add in images if you like. I'm going to go ahead and close this one out because I do have an example already built here, and I have a question, which dog costume do you prefer most and least? And in addition to setting this up here, you'll also be able to add additional parameters to your survey and add additional settings as well. So here's the setup question. Select settings, and on the right side you'll be able to include validation requirements, JavaScript requirements, randomization options, and you'll also be able to specify the maximum attributes that you'd like to test. So say for instance here I have 8 dog costumes, but perhaps I only want to test 4 out of that. You can do that here. You'll also be able to specify the attributes per task, which is the number of attributes on each screen that you would like to see. In this case, because it's cuteness overload, I figured we can show people 2 at a time, and that'll give people an idea of which one they like better over another one. And then the last one, you'll also be able to specify whether or not you would like to test the attributes more than once, and you can have them up to 10. In this case, I'm just going to go with once and go ahead and click Save. Below here, I also put together a quick example of what a standard MaxDiff looks like without images as well. So it looks fairly familiar. And let's go ahead and open up the preview and see what the user experience is like. And you can see here with these pictures that it will move according to the most least preference that you pick. Now this is too hard, I can't decide. They're all super cute, aren't they? And this is what one without images would look like. So you can see there's thumbs up, thumbs down. Very easy to use.
I like that thumbs up, thumbs down technique you have in there. I think that's excellent reinforcement to the respondent.
Exactly. So let's go ahead and jump into the next section, which is the analytics. And under analytics, we'll just go to the left navigation and select MaxDiff analysis. And let's find out who is our custom contest winner. And the very first thing you'll see on our page is the overall preference pie chart. You can kind of scroll over and see what the scores are as well. And you can see that the Cookie Monster dog is our winner. And then you can also scroll down to the bottom where you'll see the most and least preference analysis. And you'll see the calculations percentage as well. The last thing you can also do is on the right-hand corner here is you can download an Excel report. And I have a copy for you guys to see. And you'll be able to analyze in more detail the percentage score of the share of preference, as well as the best and worst profile, and analyze these together, and also review a bar chart as well as a comparison bar chart. So as you can see here, Survey Analytics offers an easy way to build a comprehensive MaxDiff study that you can combine with over 50+ question types. And the analysis is very easy to access and quantify. And you'll also be able to share your exciting results to help drive business decisions or even help select a custom contest winner. And in this case here, our Cookie Monster dog is the winner. So next, I'm going to pass this back to Viv, who will introduce our next speaker.
All right, great. Thank you, Esther. That was a good, quick kind of gem in overview. There are a couple of questions that are interesting questions that have come up. I think most of them are really related to how many, and I think this goes to Richard, probably goes to you, is how do you decide how many, what is the cognitive stress versus how many times do you show, say, let's say you have a list of 15 items, do you divide it by 4 by 4, or do you divide it by 8 by 2? What are the pros and cons? Can you speak to that as to what are the pros and cons of kind of, dividing the number of tasks per user and the number of items per task? Can you speak to that a little bit?
I can. In terms of number of items, the literature suggests that 4 or 5 is generally the best number. If you think about this for a second, you're going to learn more about their preferences if you ask them about 4 brands than you in one task than if you ask them about 10, because you can decompose the most and least over 4 brands into, I think, six different paired comparisons. So you're losing a lot of information at the 10 level in some sense, and also you have the cognitive burden of that. So the literature suggests that 4 or 5 is about the right number in most cases. In terms of the number of tasks, you have the cognitive burden issue, which isn't very heavy because, as Esther was pointing out, this is actually a pretty fun process for the respondent. And it's simple. It's easy to do. You can easily sometimes even if the choices are hard, you're still picking worst and best, and that's easier than scaling. So the issue becomes more one of analytic precision. In the example she used, she's looking at aggregate answers, so it's a lot simpler. You can do whatever you want basically. If you're looking to estimate accurately the scores of or preferences for each respondent individually, then you have to look at the modeling issues more, and so you build your experimental design, and you have to do some testing of that design prior to launch in order to know that you're getting adequate precision. But it gets a lot more technical if you're doing it at the individual level.
Yep, got it. Thanks for the answer. So we're going to switch to Bert. I wanna listen to Bert now. Bert, you're the presenter right now. Tell us how you guys at Ferguson have used MaxDiff, and educate us from your perspective.
Sure. Thank you very much, Vivek, and thanks for the kind introduction earlier, and to Esther for her front-end expertise, and Richard for that validational information about the use of the metric. As Vivek stated, I'm a member of Market Research Group here at Ferguson. We're the nation's largest wholesaler of plumbing supplies and equipment, to include finished rough fixtures. We have about 1,500 locations nationwide, very diverse footprint and levels of expertise, and we service the residential, commercial, and industrial sectors of the contracting world. So with such diversity, it should be no surprise that with our economy kind of gaining ground, market research insights here are in high demand. Not only do we apply methodological market research best practices to our customer research, but we have found that with over 18,000 Ferguson associates or employees nationwide, these methodologies used in market research have practical implications when engaging in employee and HR research as well. We know that, like most large enterprise organizations, having such a large employee base means our people are an integral extension of our brand and how it is perceived in our various marketplaces. So with that said, we adopted the trend that many large companies have, where large samples of employee preferences might be best be gauged by some of these new, more advanced measures, such as MaxDiff and Conjoint. Conjoint is a hot topic amongst HR researchers in the world today, and they've adapted that based on the use in the consumer packaged goods industry of the past as a way of gauging that. So what I have on my screen currently is an example. At first, you can see on the screen, in the olden days, we would do a number of different things. Let's say we were trying to gauge importance for making a product choice within a particular category, and in the contracting world, one of those might be hand tools. So we may ask, which of the following factors are important when choosing a brand of plumbing hand tool? And they would include all of those which they feel is important, and then we might follow up to get that top box response of, and which of these factors is most important, or have some sort of logic that might display those chosen in the previous question. Again, a lot of bias going on there, because if a service provider is asking a customer what's important to you, and they know that they're going to take their response seriously, they might answer everything all the time. You get this, flat line kind of all-encompassing response. So you need something that's a little bit more discrete choice. And then right after the 90s, a lot of people, like the companies I was with at the time, adopted discrete choice Conjoint. But we would have so many exercises and so many utility rotations that there was a lot of survey and respondent fatigue. So when MaxDiff came into popularity, around 2005 amongst my circles in market research, it was heavily adopted because there's a lot less fatigue. You get right to the point. The front end looks good. And as Esther cited in her example earlier, you can use those up, down, thumbs up, thumbs down, images, and people are a lot more responsive to symbols and imagery than they are flat text. So with MaxDiff, we might evolve this into asking the customer, please indicate which of the following factors are most important when choosing a brand of plumbing hand tool, and which factor is least important, to gauge that answer. how we might use that in other realms. Let's say that we want to not only engage that type of information or gather that information from our customer base, but because we have such a large employee base, if our sampling is done correctly, we might also ask this of our customer front-facing associates by saying, based on the feedback you've been provided by your customers, please indicate which of the following factors are most important to your local customers when choosing a brand of plumbing hand tool, and which factor is the least important to them. So by pairing this and the data associated with this research, we can see how strategically aligned our associates might be to what our customer perceptions are. Lastly, there are employee reward aspects that MaxDiff can have value. Large enterprise organizations regularly tap associates to gauge how they are providing their services, and a lot of that is centered around things like benefits and perks that come with being the employee of a large organization. So by forcing choices for the most and least, it can help drive strategic changes within employee benefit offerings and or policies. For example here, when considering a health insurance plan, which one factor is most important and which one is least important? And in this particular case, it's a measurement of what you pay on a regular basis through your medical insurance. So those are just 3 ways that we've kind of utilized the technique and set how many rotations or utility exercises that we would use, and we always try to keep that under 5 attributes or utilities on the screen at any time with no more than 4 rotations. And that's it.
Great, thanks, Bert. I have a quick question. I think it's fascinating that you guys, since you have such a large associate base, you could actually do kind of associate perception versus customer perception, really. How was that? I'm kind of curious as to say, was the alignment near or far in terms of when you guys did the study, in terms of how your associates perceive you versus, or I guess how your associates think your customers perceive you versus customers actually perceiving you, really? How was that alignment? I'm just curious.
Well, it goes in 2 directions. We may already have an idea and we need to do that type of research to validate what we already know, or we need to see if there needs to be, a campaign amongst our internal associates versus our customers to make sure that they are both aligned. If our customers are telling us that the most important attribute to their choice in hand tool is price, that helps us drive our strategy. But to do that effectively, we have to make sure that the associates who market those products in a service fashion or in front of the customer, if they're not aligned, then we need to, change the strategy for how we train employees, or perhaps it might be something to the effect of, our customer base is providing a new insight. So when there's variation, it's all about sampling too, but when there's variation in that, we have to, we have to use a more advanced measure, because to gauge that variation will take a lot of other techniques that are too time-consuming and too fatiguing on the respondent, whether it be an employee or a customer.
That's what I'm hearing is you guys use this as kind of a broad general indicator, and then if you find something, then you kind of dive deep into it at that point, really.
Correct.
All right. There's actually another interesting question that came up from one of the audience. And since we talked about the imagery really around the thumbs up and the thumbs down, as well as kind of Richard had that other model for things sliding to the right, Jay Lee asks, are there any concerns, and I'll open it to the audience, right? I open it up to both of you guys, really. Are there any concerns in terms of, using that imagery when fielding things globally? Do you guys feel that, thumbs up, thumbs down kind of, obviously it translates in the US, but, do you think it translates globally?
And I know, Richard, you probably could speak to this as well. I've done research in the past where we took a United States tried and true ad testing methodology using symbols that were thumbs up, thumbs down, and survey branching and logic that responded to how they answered, and then tried to take it globally, and it failed massively in the Far East and in Asian countries because those symbols mean something else in their culture. A thumbs down appearing on a screen in Asia is a symbol of shame. So in essence, based on their answers, you've shamed them. So they clam up for the rest of the survey and don't give you real answers. So you have to be careful about that.
That's a good point. Richard, what are your thoughts?
I think Bert makes an excellent point with a perfect example. We always have to be careful in multinational studies, even with the way you phrase words, even without pictures. So you have to have a native speaker on the ground review that survey for everything, and certainly visuals are really, really important to have validated by a native. You can't assume that symbols that work here are going to work anywhere else. You can't even assume words that work here are going to work anywhere else.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting. We get carried away with the symbols because obviously we can associate ourselves with it while designing it. But when we are, especially when you're doing international studies, then we just have to do a little bit more testing around it. I have another good one. Good question from Betsy over here. What if we had 60 or 100 attributes that you want to test? How would you guys go about doing it?
Go ahead, Bert.
Go ahead. No, well, I would in this particular cases, because each set of attributes, is when you're doing, I closely associate MaxDiff with conjoint because I consider it a form of that. Some people don't. They would argue that it's not. It is its own entity. But because of that, and you have to sample correctly, I might divide up quota groups specifically, and that's where you really get away from random sampling. But it's all in the sampling in that point. You might have to let's say if it's 60 attributes, and you divide that up into 6 quota groups, making sure there's an even spread of the utilities across those groups so that they don't all see all of those attributes. I mean, that's maybe compromising the methodology of MaxDiff a little bit, but sometimes 60 and the amount of utilities you have is just too much, and you have to go back to the drawing table.
Richard, have you dealt with where? Go ahead. Sorry.
Yes. Yeah. I have, and it's a really interesting question because people worry about this because we oftentimes have very, very large batteries. The rule of thumb in MaxDiff right now is that you have each item needs to be exposed to each respondent a minimum of 3 times. So if you had 30 items and you're doing 5 at a time, that would mean 18 tasks to come up to that rule. But a German researcher named Ralph Wirth, and I've forgotten he works for some gigantic research company whose initials I cannot remember now. But he's done some very interesting work with much fewer tasks than that. And it's called Express MaxDiff is one version and Sparse MaxDiff is the other. And he gets away with 1/3 as many tasks, meaning 1 exposure per person basically, and is getting a very good individual level MaxDiff results. So that's the best way I know of to handle a large number. And there's 2 different ways, and I won't get into the details of them, but you can handle a large number of MaxDiff tasks and still recover really good utility estimates.
Individual utility estimates, yeah, got it. So I think you bought 2 things. We can all probably Wikipedia this and figure out Express MaxDiff and Sparse MaxDiff. I think assuming they kind of have some analytical model behind in terms of the display of the attributes, really, kind of smartly displaying the attributes. Is that what it is? Is in a nutshell, is that how Ralph has solved that problem?
No, really, what Ralph has done is he's created a very clever experimental design. One version is that every respondent sees a subset. Let's say every respondent sees 20 items, but every respondent sees a different 20. And then in the analytics phase, using the hierarchical Bayesian estimation, there is a way to sort of knit that back together, and based on respondent A's answers for his 20, we can figure out what he would have answered for the other 40. And it gets highly complicated, but it works. It's partly he's leveraging the nature of hierarchical Bayesian estimation. It's very clever.
Got it. Makes sense. So I guess people who really want to kind of dig into this and get their hands dirty can Google it up and figure out what to do. I think another question that comes up is, I think product preference mapping has been, obviously great examples of this. Have you guys used this in terms of customer satisfaction mapping also? In terms of, is it mapping, different components of a service? Is that how you would map customer satisfaction?
Are you asking, is MaxDiff used for customer satisfaction?
Yes. Have you guys used it, or have you seen it being used?
Both, yes. I think customer satisfaction is one of the primary uses of MaxDiff. It's used in that area a lot.
All right. I guess the other question that's coming up over here, I think we've kind of established the fact that, about five items per task, and then you made an important judgment around, each person has to see it at least 3 times, and then there's an option for kind of being smart about it and trying to get away by showing each attribute once, really. So that are those the rules that I guess we all can agree upon at this point, at least. If you were, I think the bit larger question that I see getting asked is, what is the model that people can use to make some guesstimates in terms of how many tasks that they need to perform? And if you make a rule like it's between 1 and 3 is the number of items per, each respondent needs to see it at least 1 to 3 times, then you can then estimate out how many tasks that has to be done. Is that a rule that Ralph, that Richard, you guys follow in terms of 1 and 3? Is that the number that you guys go with when you consult with your clients?
Yes, and if the number of items in the set is small enough that we can do three exposures per item per respondent, then we go that way just to be safe. Although we have experimented on some fairly large studies with 1 exposure per respondent, and we've gotten very good results.
Have you, with just 1 exposure?
Traditionally.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, there's tricks you can do analytically to try to tease out a little bit more information. Something called, you can put covariates in your HB model, your hierarchical Bayes model, and that helps kind of tease out information a bit more.
Got it. All right. Bert, how do you decide when you decide on the model? How do you decide how many times should a user see a particular task before you call it good, or an attribute rather?
It depends on what it depends on what confidence or confidence interval level I want to have with the research. If the stakes are really high in the goals of the research, then I'm going to take a conservative approach and not risk it. So I might have each attribute exposed 5 times as a minimum, and I have done that in the past just to be safe. If it just depends on what this research is driving. If it's a soft benefit or soft strategic initiative, that's one thing. But if it's a hard benefit, that's going to involve the movement of a large amount of funds, most companies would require, a backing of the methodology to state a certain level of confidence with the methodology that's used. And in this case, whether it be conjoint or MaxDiff, we want to, as many exposures as we can get away with without causing either fatigue or those types of biases.
So it all comes down to money, right? So
correct.
So if you're making $100 million purchasing decision, you obviously spend more time and energy and effort into this versus a $10 million purchasing decision. So
correct.
All right. So I think we've answered most of the general questions. There are a bunch of other questions in there, but I think we wanted to keep this webinar short and sweet, but I think we ran over by about 15-20 minutes. So I think I'm just going to call it good right now and call it done. Once again, thank you everybody for showing up. What we'll also, there are a couple other kind of housekeeping questions, housekeeping logistical items. We'll obviously send out a video of this webinar out to everybody who's registered. And also we'll try to kind of put together a Q&A session and display the Q&A session and go through and post that up on the Survey Analytics blog. I also want to again thank Bert, and Esther and Richard. Thank you very much for joining us. Hope this was fun, and we'll try to do this again.
Thank you, everyone.
All right.
Thanks, guys.
All right. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.